Hey everyone, ready for a deep dive that will actually help you crush those upcoming exams?
We're tackling experiments and surveys today.
Two research methods that, let's be honest.
Pretty much always pop up on those tests.
And the best part is you don't have to stress because Grade Guru has your back
With practice exams and a super helpful summary.
over at gradeguru.nl.
It's all waiting for you there.
So what's really cool about these methods?
Is there not just some boring textbook concepts?
They're how we actually figure things out in the real world.
Yeah, like experiments.
Those help us untangle what causes what.
And then surveys give us a snapshot of what a whole bunch of people think or are doing.
Okay, so we're not just talking about passing an exam here.
Nope.
It's about really understanding how we build knowledge.
Exactly.
I like that.
So let's start with experiments.
Okay.
Think about it like this.
Right.
Imagine some companies out there saying their new energy drink totally boosts athletic performance.
Okay.
How would they actually prove that?
Well, they can't just give it to a bunch of athletes and be like, see, they're amazing now.
Right.
There could be a million other reasons why those athletes are doing well.
That's exactly where the awesomeness of a true experiment comes in.
Okay, tell me more.
You gotta have two groups.
Right.
One gets the energy drink.
So that's our experimental group.
Yep. And the other gets a placebo.
So something that looks exactly the same,
Exactly.
but doesn't actually have the special ingredient.
Exactly.
Yeah,
That's the control group.
got it.
And here's the thing.
What's that?
To make sure it's a totally fair test, you can't let people pick their group.
Right?
You've got to randomly assign them.
Okay, that makes sense.
That way, any differences in performance are more likely because of the drink itself.
Not because one group was already like super athletic to begin with.
Right. And then you measure their performance before and after.
To see if there's a real change.
Exactly.
All right, so random assignment,
Uh-huh.
controlled environment.
Yeah.
Pre-test and post-test.
You got it.
Got it.
Yeah.
But what about those research questions where you can't control absolutely everything perfectly?
Okay.
Like if you want to study the effects of a new law
Yeah.
on something like crime rates,
Right.
you can't just randomly assign entire cities to have different laws,
Yeah,
right?
You're totally hitting on a crucial point.
Am I?
Yeah. That's where quasi-experiments come in.
Okay.
They're like experiments,
Okay.
but you're working with groups that already exist.
Not ones you randomly put together.
Exactly.
So you might compare crime rates in cities that implemented the new law
Yes.
to cities that didn't.
Exactly.
But how do you know that difference in crime rates isn't from something other than the law? Like maybe the cities were already on different paths before the law even existed.
You're getting into the trickier part now.
Oh, am I?
Yeah. That's why quasi-experiments need extra careful analysis.
Oh, okay.
You have to gather data on all those other potential factors.
So like population density,
Uh-huh.
poverty rates,
Yeah,
pre-existing crime trends.
exactly. And then,
About that stuff.
yep, you have to use statistical techniques to try and isolate the effect of the law.
So you're basically acknowledging that the experiment isn't perfect,
Right.
but you're trying to statistically account for those imperfections.
Exactly.
Interesting.
It's all about getting as close as you can to understanding that cause and effect relationship.
Even when you can't control everything like you can in a true experiment.
Exactly. Now let's shift gears a bit.
Okay.
Let's talk about situations where we're not actually trying to change anything.
Sure.
We just want to observe what's already happening.
Like what?
Think of like animal behavior studies.
Okay.
You wouldn't want to disrupt their natural patterns.
Oh, observation is like being a fly on the wall.
Exactly.
I can see that'd be useful.
Yeah,
But isn't it just kind of watching and taking notes?
it can be.
Okay.
But there's more to it than you might think.
Really?
Yeah, take hidden observation.
What's that?
Researchers might use hidden cameras to study how shoppers navigate a store, for instance.
Okay, so they act naturally.
Yeah, because they don't know they're being watched.
Makes sense.
Then there's open observation,
Okay.
where the observer is totally visible.
Okay.
This is common in child development studies.
So researchers might watch kids playing
Uh-huh.
and keep track of how often specific behaviors happen.
Exactly.
So hidden observation for totally natural behavior
Uh,
and open observation for the stuff you can really measure.
makes sense. Right.
What about when researchers actually participate in the situation they're observing?
Oh, that's participant observation.
That sounds pretty intense.
It is.
Like-
It's like getting a backstage pass to a whole different culture or social group.
Like if an anthropologist is living with a remote tribe.
Yeah. Learning their language, customs, beliefs.
Wow.
That's participant observation.
I can see how that'd be challenging.
It is. It can be tough to stay objective.
when you're so immersed.
Exact.
So with all these types of observation,
Mm.
is it just random note-taking or is there some structure to it?
That's a great question. It actually depends on the research approach.
Okay.
If you're trying to test a very specific hypothesis,
Like babies who are held more often cry less.
that's a good one.
Thanks.
That would be deductive reasoning.
Okay.
And you'd probably use structured observation.
With a predefined checklist of behaviors to
Yeah,
record.
Exactly.
But if you're going into it with a more open mind,
Uh-huh.
letting the observations guide your theory building,
Right.
that's inductive reasoning.
Yes.
And you'd probably use unstructured observation.
Yeah, taking detailed notes on anything that seems interesting or important.
So structured observation is more about confirming or disproving a specific idea.
Yep.
While unstructured is more about discovering new patterns.
You got it.
This is fascinating.
It is.
So we've covered experiments,
We have?
observations.
Yep.
What about surveys?
Oh, good one.
Those seem pretty straightforward,
Yeah,
just asking people questions.
they seem that way.
Yeah. But there's more to it than you might think.
Oh, really?
The power of surveys is in their ability to gather data from a huge group of people.
Okay.
Ideally, a representative sample of the population you're studying.
Like those polls you see before elections.
Exactly.
They're trying to predict how millions of people will vote
Uh-huh.
based on responses from a much smaller group.
Right, but a carefully selected one.
So it's not just about asking anyone.
Yeah.
It's about asking the right people so you can generalize the findings.
Exactly.
But how do you even make sure you're getting a representative sample?
Good question.
You can't exactly force people to participate.
You're right, that's a key challenge.
Right.
Random sampling is the gold standard.
Okay.
Imagine you have a list of every single eligible voter in a city,
Okay.
and you use a computer to randomly pick a certain number to participate.
Okay, so that way every voter has an equal chance of being included.
Exactly. And you're way more likely to get a sample that accurately reflects the diversity of that whole population.
That makes sense. Good.
But in the real world,
Yeah.
don't people refuse to do surveys sometimes?
Oh, all the time.
Wouldn't that mess up the results?
Absolutely. That's called non-response bias.
Non-response bias.
And it's a big worry for survey researchers.
So if certain groups of people are less likely to participate,
Like maybe they're too busy or just not into surveys.
your sample might not be truly representative.
Yeah, even if you started with random selection.
So it's like this constant battle to get as close as you can to that ideal random sample,
Uh-huh.
knowing that it's rarely perfect in reality.
Exactly.
Okay.
Now, even with a representative sample,
Yeah.
there's another challenge, designing the survey itself.
Okay.
And when it comes to surveys, questionnaires are like the workhorse.
So we're talking about those lists of questions.
Yes.
Whether they're online or on paper
Uh-huh.
or even asked over the phone.
Yep, all of those.
But I bet designing a good questionnaire is way harder than it looks.
You're right. It's more than just jotting down some questions.
What else goes into it?
You have to think about the type of data you need.
Oh, okay.
Are you looking for yes/no answers?
Or do you need people to rate things on a scale
Exactly. Should the questions be open-ended?
so they can give detailed answers?
Yeah, or closed-ended with just a few choices.
And how do you decide whether to use an online survey or a paper one?
Right.
Or even do phone interviews?
Good question.
I mean, they each have their own pluses and minuses, right?
Absolutely. Online surveys are super quick
Yeah.
and easy to analyze,
Right.
but you might miss out on people who aren't really comfortable with technology.
That's true.
Paper surveys can reach more people,
Yeah.
but they take longer to process.
Yeah, that's true.
Phone interviews let you have more in-depth conversations,
Oh, they-
but they can be expensive and time-consuming.
So choosing the right format depends on your research question,
Yep.
your target audience,
Uh-huh.
and your budget.
Exactly.
It sounds like there's a lot of strategic thinking that goes into making a good questionnaire.
There is.
And that's before you even start collecting data.
Exactly. Designing a good questionnaire is a real art and a science.
Yes.
You have to think about how you word your questions, the order you ask them, and
Right.
even the layout and how visually appealing the survey is.
Okay.
All of these things can affect how people respond
Wow.
and ultimately the quality of your data.
So we've covered experiments,
Yes.
observation,
You have.
and now we're getting into the nitty-gritty of questionnaire design.
I know, it's a lot.
It is a lot, especially when you're trying to study for exams.
I know.
It's kind of overwhelming.
That's why it helps to break things down into key takeaways.
Oh, good idea.
Okay, for experiments, remember, random assignment,
Okay.
controlled environment,
Got it.
and comparing pre-test and post-test measurements.
Got it.
For observations, think about the three main types: hidden, open, and participant,
Okay.
and how each one gives you a different look into behavior.
Okay. Those are helpful reminders.
And for surveys, focus on large-scale data collection. Okay, standardized questions.
Uh-huh.
And that's super important, random sampling.
It's like a mental cheat sheet for those exam questions.
Exactly.
And of course, don't forget,
Yeah.
Grade Guru has got you covered.
Yes.
With practice exams and a full summary.
Over at gradeguru.nl.
It's like having a study buddy who's always there to help you out.
I like that.
Yeah.
Now, let's shift gears and see how these methods are actually used in different areas of research.
Okay.
We'll look at how psychologists use experiments to study the effects of stress on memory,
Okay.
how economists use quasi-experiments to evaluate government policies,
Okay.
and how marketers use surveys to figure out what consumers want.
Okay.
These real-world examples will help you really understand these concepts and make them come to life.
Sounds great. I'm ready to see these methods in action.
All right, let's do it.
All right, so let's jump into some of those real-world applications.
Yeah, let's do it.
It's one thing to get the concepts,
Uh-huh.
but seeing them in action really brings it all home.
Totally. Let's start with psychology.
Okay.
Imagine researchers are looking into the effects of a new therapy on anxiety.
Okay.
They could design a randomized controlled trial
Okay.
where they randomly assign people to either the new therapy group
Okay.
or a control group that gets the standard treatment.
So it's kind of like that energy drink example,
Yeah.
but instead of athletic performance, they're measuring anxiety levels.
Exactly.
But wait, wouldn't knowing which group you're in,
Yeah.
like, mess with your anxiety?
Hmm.
If you...
Oh, that's a great point. To avoid that, they'd use something called blinding.
Blinding.
Yeah, where neither the participants
Okay.
nor the researchers working with them
Yep.
know who's getting which treatment.
Oh, so it's like a double check to make sure things are as objective as possible.
Exactly. That helps make sure any differences they see are really because of the therapy itself.
Not just expectations.
Right. Or bias.
Blinding? That's clever.
Hmm.
So psychology is all about experiments, right?
Hmm.
What about economics?
Hmm.
It seems harder to study those things with experiments.
You're right. Economics often deals with these really complex systems and real-world policy
Yeah.
that are hard to control in that way.
Like, you can't just manipulate an entire economy in a lab.
Exactly. But that doesn't mean experiments are out of the question.
Okay.
Think about behavioral economics.
Okay.
It combines psychology and economics.
Oh, what?
Researchers might use experiments to study how people make decisions.
In different situations.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like how they react to incentives or how framing affects their choices.
So even in a field like economics where you can't control whole economies,
Yeah.
you can still use experiments to study, like, the building blocks of economic behavior.
Precisely.
Okay.
Now let's look at a classic economics example.
Right.
Studying the effects of a minimum wage increase on employment,
Okay.
doing a true experiment would be impossible.
Yeah, you can't randomly give different minimum wages to different cities.
Exactly. So economists might use a quasi-experimental approach,
Okay.
comparing employment trends in cities that increased their minimum wage.
To those that didn't?
Exactly.
But like we said before, how do you know those differences aren't from something totally different?
Yeah.
Maybe the cities that raised the minimum wage already had stronger economies.
Right.
Or different labor market dynamics.
That's the challenge with quasi-experiments.
Yeah.
To make their analysis stronger, economists try to look for what are called natural experiments.
What are those?
Situations where things that happen in the real world
Uh-huh.
create conditions that are similar to a controlled experiment.
Oh, interesting.
Like they might study what happened to employment in neighboring counties
Okay.
along a state border where one state raised the minimum wage
Yeah.
and the other didn't.
Oh, so it's like nature accidentally made a quasi-experiment for them.
Exactly.
That's really cool. Okay, let's move on to surveys. We talked about how they're great for understanding opinions and attitudes and behaviors
Yeah.
on a big scale.
Right.
But can you give us some specific examples?
Absolutely. Surveys are incredibly versatile.
Okay.
Let's say a public health agency wants to understand how common smoking is in a community.
Okay.
They could do a survey with a representative sample of residents
Okay.
asking about their smoking habits, their age, education level, all that demographic stuff.
So it's not just do you smoke?
Right.
It's getting all this other information that could help them see the bigger picture.
Exactly. Like, are smoking rates higher in certain age groups?
Or among people with less education.
Exactly. That kind of data can help them target anti-smoking campaigns better.
Okay, so it's really strategic.
It is. Or imagine a company wants to launch a new product,
Okay.
and they need to know what consumers want.
Okay.
They might do a survey asking potential customers about what they need,
Okay.
what they like and don't like,
Okay.
and how much they'd pay for certain features.
Oh, yeah. I've totally taken those kinds of surveys.
Yeah.
They're always asking me to rate things from 1 to 5.
Yeah,
Or pick my favorite from a list.
exactly. Those rating scales and multiple choice questions are super common in questionnaires.
Yeah.
They make the data much easier to analyze.
And to compare responses across different groups.
Right. But surveys aren't limited to just those simple formats.
Okay.
Researchers can also use open-ended questions to get more detailed insights.
Oh.
For example, they might ask, what are your biggest concerns about climate change?
Okay.
Or what features would you like to see in a new smartphone?
So it's like a range from really structured questions
Uh-huh.
with limited choices
Yeah.
to more open-ended questions where people can just say what they think.
Exactly.
But even with well-designed questions, we talked about those biases that can sneak in.
Right.
How do researchers keep those in check?
That's where careful planning and execution are so important.
Okay.
First, remember random sampling. That's key to minimize the risk of a wonky sample.
Okay, so random sampling is crucial.
It is. And then think about the wording of your questions.
Yeah.
Even small differences in how you phrase things
Yeah.
can affect how people answer.
So it's not just about what you ask,
No.
it's about how you ask it.
Precisely.
Okay.
Researchers have to use clear, unbiased language
Uh-huh.
that doesn't steer the person towards a certain answer.
Okay.
And they also need to think about the order of the questions.
Okay.
Because questions that come earlier can sometimes prime people.
To answer later questions in a specific way,
Exactly.
it sounds like making a good survey is like walking a tightrope,
It is.
trying to balance all these different things
You got it.
to get the most accurate and insightful data.
Exactly.
Wow. I'm really starting to see how complex these seemingly simple research methods are.
Uh-huh.
It's not just asking questions or setting up experiments.
Nope.
It's about understanding all the details,
Yes.
the possible biases, and the limitations of each approach.
Exactly. And that critical thinking
Yeah.
is what will really set you apart.
Not just on exams,
Right.
but in understanding the world around us.
You got it.
This has been an awesome deep dive into research methods.
It has.
I feel like I'm on a whole new level now
Good.
and definitely ready to tackle those exam questions.
I'm glad to hear that. And don't forget, if you want to really solidify your understanding,
Yeah.
GradeGuru.nl has those practice exams and a full summary waiting for you.
All right, before we wrap up,
Yeah.
I'd love to hear your final thoughts.
Okay.
What's the biggest takeaway you want our listeners to remember about experiments and surveys?
Well, I think the biggest takeaway is that both experiments and surveys are really powerful tools for understanding the world around us, but they each have their own strengths and weaknesses.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. Like, we've seen experiments are awesome for figuring out cause and effect, but they can be really tough or even impossible to do in some real-world situations.
Yeah, exactly. And that's where surveys can really shine. They can give us super valuable insights into what people think, how they feel, and what they do on a large scale. But we always have to be careful about potential biases and limitations.
Right. Like
Yeah.
that whole random sampling thing we talked about.
Mm-hmm.
And making sure our questions are worded in a way that doesn't push people toward a specific answer. It's a lot to keep track of.
It is. But remember, this whole deep dive was about giving you the tools and the knowledge you need
Okay.
to not only ace those exams, but also to become a more informed and critical thinker when you come across information in the world.
I like that. And speaking of acing exams,
Yeah.
don't forget about GradeGuru.nl.
Oh, yeah, the best study buddy.
They've got practice exams and a full summary of everything we talked about today.
It's all there waiting for you.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So before we sign off,
Yeah.
let's go back to that thought-provoking question you asked earlier.
Okay.
Can you think of a research question where both experiments and these surveys would be really valuable?
Yeah.
What unique insights would each method give us?
Ooh. That's a good one. I'm trying to think.
I'm thinking maybe something like studying how effective a new educational program is.
Okay, yeah.
You could do an experiment with a small group of students.
Yeah.
to see if the program actually helps them learn better.
Yeah.
But you could also use a survey to get feedback from a much larger group of students about their experience,
Okay.
like what they liked, what they didn't like, and any suggestions they have.
That's a fantastic example.
Is it?
The experiment would give you that solid cause and effect data,
Okay.
while the survey would give you all that awesome context and insight into the student's actual thoughts and feelings.
So we're combining those two approaches.
Yeah. To get a much richer and deeper understanding of how the program is really impacting things.
It's like getting the best of both worlds.
Exactly. The numbers from the experiment
Okay.
and the personal stories and opinions from the survey
All working together.
to tell a more complete story.
I like that. And this multi-method approach is becoming more and more popular in research, right?
It is. It lets researchers tackle complex questions from different angles and to really make sure their findings are solid and valid.
This has been such an insightful conversation.
It has.
I feel like I've learned so much, not just about experiments and surveys,
Yeah.
but about the whole research process in general. It's given me a lot to think about.
That's what we were hoping for. Remember, research isn't just about memorizing facts and figures for a test. It's about being curious, thinking critically, and using evidence to understand the world around us.
Yeah, well said. So on that note, we'll wrap up this episode of The Deep Dive.
Okay.
We hope you found it helpful, and we wish you all the best on your exams.
Happy studying, everyone.